a near-death experience in 1982 when I was 22 years old. At that time, I was a very avid atheist. I had just finished Vassar College, where I wrote my senior thesis on the death of God as it appeared in modernism. I was living in New York City, and I was an alcoholic, and I loved to party. So I was at a nightclub and ran out of cocaine and bought what I thought was some more from a guy at the club. My date and I were snorting it, but it wasn't getting us high. So I just snorted the whole pile in hopes that it would get me high. Later, after I got sober, and my friends in my 12-step program who used to be drug dealers heard about my story, they said that was lidocaine. They said, we used to cut cocaine with lidocaine in the 80s, but you were sold pure lidocaine. So I began to notice that I was getting tunnel vision. The outsides of my eyes were showing a kind of an orange speckle. Gradually, as my heart was slowing down to maybe 30 beats, 20 beats a minute because of the lidocaine, I began to feel there was no air in the nightclub. So I was panicking a little bit, and I told my date, there's no air, there's no air. He said, let's get you a glass of water. He took me to the bar. Bartender gave me a glass of water. I took a sip, and then I thought for a second that I had smashed my chin on the bar, collapsing. I was actually going into a grand mal seizure and cardiac arrest. But to me, it seemed that that punch under the chin shot me up in the air like a Popeye punch. And I was flying up in the air, and I had a brief sense of leaving all that nonsense behind. And that's the last I remembered of my life as Louisa. So I zoomed upward, I did a back bend and arched over and did a dive until I came into the ocean. I went very deep and then wanted to be at the surface, and I was at the surface. I looked and saw the shore quite a ways away. I wanted to be there, and then I was there. I looked down the beach and I saw a mesa or a sea stack with an old weathered house on top of it. And I knew it had to do with me. I wanted to be there, and then I was at the foot of the mesa, but now it was a whole bunch of rocks, and they were covered with this horrible, repulsive, putrid slime. I thought at the time it might be rotten seaweed, but I knew I had to climb it to reach the house. So I did. I climbed it, and when I got to the house, I was only 1 inch tall. I didn't have a body anymore at all. I had become just a subjective camera about 1 inch off the ground. So this camera of meanness moved over the door sill, and at that moment realized that all my ancestors had crossed that same threshold, and that this was our house of transition. And I knew they had all gone ahead of me to something more. I didn't know what, but they were present, and I could feel them. I could feel their joy at anticipating seeing me, especially my grandfather, who had never met me in life. Was eager to meet me here. So I moved over the wood. I could see it really, really clearly because I was so close up, and I knew that like feet after feet after feet after generation after generation after generation had passed through this very spot and worn the wood to a kind of a velvety texture. There was supposed to be a chair in the middle of the room where my ancestors all loved to sit and look out at the ocean. And I thought, I want to do that. It's my turn, and I'm too short. And there was no chair. And so something in response to that seemed to catch me by my heart, though I didn't have a body, and pull me forward across the floor. I had a big sense of, whoa, what's happening? But a good one. And then I went up over the sill, and then I was flying over the ocean, and I was flying toward the sun, which was setting, so it was casting a kind of dappled path of light over the ocean. There were golden colors all around me. It's just the most beautiful sunset you can imagine, and I was zooming into it over the water. I felt such bliss and such joy. I could feel the speed of my zooming. And then I had a thought, wait a minute, people can't fly. Is this a dream? Is this real? and a voice answered me that I didn't expect. It was a very deep, powerful kind of voice. Not that I heard it, but I felt it in my mind, and it said more real than anything back there, meaning in my life. And I knew that it was right. So I got closer and closer to the sun. I became a little concerned that I was going to hit it and burn up, but instead I passed through a filament into the interior of the sun. And in the center of the sun was light. It was the light. It was all pervasive, just completely passed through me, in me, this feeling of bliss and love. So much love and warmth and goodness and happiness. And I felt complete. I became aware of a parent figure who was holding me, sort of sitting like a Buddha, but holding me like a little infant in his or her arms and just pouring love into me. You are so loved. And I just wanted to stay there forever. It was perfect. But then the parent said, "You can't stay, you're not done yet." And I threw a fit. The light went to complete blackness. And I said, "No!" And I had a sense of just like kicking and screaming and wanting to show the parent that I wanted to stay. The parent just said, "Case closed." And I was falling through blackness. It was the first time I felt afraid. And then I began to see in the darkness these chalk figures, stick figures drawn in chalk, and they were like little children's animations. They were doing cartwheels, they were going on swings, and they were saying these little nonsense nursery rhymes like, "How many fiddles make a flim flam?" or "How many hippos make a hopscotch?" And I thought, well, it's nowhere near as good as the light, but this is something that the parent has given me to watch until I can go back to the light, because I knew I was going to go back to the light. I was determined I was going to get back there. And I was watching them just kind of hanging out, and then one of them sort of moved in closer and began to fill in like a dinner plate instead of a chalk circle. And his nursery rhyme that he kept saying was, "How many fingers? What is your name?" And I was just kind of like trying to see around him, and then I realized that he thought he was talking to me, and I realized that he thought he was separate from me, and then I realized I was back in the meat puppet. I was back in my body, and I was absolutely devastated. I felt I couldn't go back to such a primitive way of existing where we move these kind of squishy things down there in our mouths and burp out sounds, and that's a kind of code for communicating. It just seemed so primitive. But eventually I did answer him, and it turned out I was lying on the floor of the nightclub in a pool of sweat, maybe a gallon of sweat that had come out when I came to. And I ended up not going to the hospital because my date had gotten in some trouble for dealing drugs at college, and he did not want any more trouble. So we jumped in a cab and went back to my home, my apartment. The next day, I thought about what had happened, and it seemed to me I had a choice. I could either say what had happened to me was real, and then I would have to become good, and I would have to become religious. I would have to stop all my drinking, all my partying, all my sleeping around, all the things that I thought made me a badass, and I was not going to do that. So I decided I'd come up with my own theory, which was that as my brain had shut down to more and more primitive levels, it finally had reached a level where there was only love. And that's what I had hallucinated as being inside the sun. So here I was, 22, had this near-death experience, rejected it and continued to be an atheist. And that was all I wanted, was to go on with that life. But I was not permitted to, because the spirit world could reach me now and show me things and speak to me. My angel, as I now call the voice, has saved my life many times. One time I was at a light that turned green and he said, "Don't go." It was night. There was no one behind me. So I waited at the green light until I was like, what am I doing? And then a car came down the intersection going about 100 miles an hour and zoomed past where I would have been if I had gone. So many times he has been in touch with me, or have known things that I shouldn't know, or he has miraculously healed me. I call him Ignacio. I asked him one day, give me a name, I need something to call you besides Angel. I had wanted him to be a girl, but he's very much not. I said, give me a name so I can call you something besides Angel. He said, kind of sigh, and he said, I've had so many names in so many languages, and you don't know any of those alphabets. And I said, so what? Just give me something. Eventually, he gave me the name Ignacio, which is an Etruscan name from one of his most recent lifetimes.